I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 27 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. And I believe we have all our members here. Okay, pursuant to the order of reference of Monday, February 9th, 2026, the committee resumes consideration of Bill C-230, an act to amend the Financial Administration Act and to make consequential amendments to other acts, Debt Forgiveness Registry. I would like to welcome our witnesses. Canada Revenue Agency, Isabelle Brault, Director General, Legislative Policy Directorate, Legislative Policy and Regulatory Affairs Branch. Jennifer Bowden, Acting Director General, Finance and Administration Branch. Charlie Norris, Acting Director General, Collections and Verification Branch. From the Department of Finance, Lachlan, is that correct? Yes. McEachern, Acting Director General, Legislation, Tax Policy Branch. And from the Treasury Board Secretariat, John Daly, Senior Director, Public Accounts and Advisory Services. Mr. Daly, you have a maximum of 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Bon après-midi, merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente et membres.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to speak to you today about how the Government of Canada manages the deletion of debts. Before beginning, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking today from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I'm accompanied by my colleagues from the Department of Finance as well as from the Canada Revenue Agency.
La loi.
Madam Chair, the Financial Administration Act is the foundational legislation that frames how the federal government manages public funds. It establishes the legal framework that guides financial management across all government departments and agencies and specifies the responsibilities of the Treasury Board and deputy heads to ensure effective and appropriate management of public finances.
The Treasury Board is the government's central financial authority. It enables the Treasury Board to establish policies and practices that help departments manage public funds responsibly. The Treasury Board Secretariat helps departments apply financial policies that explain how departments should handle situations where a debt may need to be written off, remitted, forgiven, or waived. The Act also requires deputy heads to maintain internal controls and conduct regular audits to ensure compliance with legal requirements as well as government policies and procedures. Within this system, there are 4 main mechanisms available for debt deletion. Number 1, which is a debt write-off, which removes the debt from the government's books when it cannot be collected or when collection is not cost-effective. The legal debt still exists, but the government stops collection efforts for various reasons. Remissions legally extinguishes a debt owed to the Crown. A remission can be approved by the Governor and Council when collection would be unreasonable, unjust, or not in the public interest. When a debt is remitted, the obligation is permanently relieved and is no longer owed to the Crown. Forgiveness also legally extinguishes a debt, but applies only to specific types of debts, such as loans or advances. These debts can only be forgiven by Parliament, usually when collection would be unreasonable, unjust, or when the forgiveness is in the public interest. Once again, the obligation is permanently removed. Waivers under the Financial Administration Act applies in limited situations to interest and administrative charges. Departments must assess each case, apply the relevant authorities, and document their decisions in line with the Financial Administration Act, debt write-off regulations, and the interest and administrative charges regulations when write-offs are in relation to the Financial Administration Act. Bill C-230 proposes to amend the Financial Administration Act to include more information on the deletion by the government of large debts owed by corporations, trust companies, and partnerships. In its current form, the bill would require the President of the Treasury Board to establish and maintain a publicly accessible, searchable online database listing any debt, obligation, or claim owed by a corporation, trust company, or partnership of $1 million or more that has been formally written off, remitted, waived, or forgiven by the Crown. It is important to situate this discussion with the government's existing reporting framework. The Public Accounts of Canada provides annual disclosures of debt obligations, and claims that have been written off, remitted, waived, or forgiven in accordance with the Financial Administration Act. The public reporting reinforces accountability by ensuring that Parliament and Canadians can understand the fiscal impact of these decisions each year. The public accounts identify the departments responsible, the level of approval involved, the legal authority, and the number and total of value debts deleted. The government takes stewardship of public funds very seriously. It also supports the objective of transparency in how public money is managed. Je suis prêt aujourd'hui à discuter du fonctionnement de ces...
I'm ready to discuss the functioning of these tools with my colleagues, their roles in sound management, and their contributions to Canadians' trust in the management of public resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McEachran, you have a maximum of 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and then we will proceed with the rounds of discussions.
Good afternoon. My name is Lachlan McEachran. I'm the Acting Director, General Legislation of the Tax Legislation Division in the Department of Finance. I'm responsible for the review of draft tax legislation, and I can speak to the consequential amendments in the bill regarding the sharing of tax information. Thank you.
And we will now begin our first round of 6 minutes, starting with Mr. Chambers. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to see all of you here in person. I much prefer this as opposed to the Zoom that we were accustomed to for a number of years, so thank you for joining us here today. I appreciate the opening remarks and the care that the government suggests that it takes on debts that are owing to the Treasury. Just a couple questions. Anyone can answer. What was the single largest write-off last year that the CRA made, or any department? Just the amount.
We can't disclose that amount due to confidentiality reasons. It's one account, and it would probably lead to the disclosure of that account.
Right.
Either
And
directly or indirectly.
in 2019, though, you're aware that that was a routine fact that was provided to Parliament, the single largest amount was $133 million in 2019. You're aware that that amount was disclosed? Right.
Fortunately, today we can't disclose that amount.
Okay. Did the Income Tax Act change between 2019 and today, or the Privacy Act between 2019 to today? Like, why can you no longer disclose a piece of information that you used to disclose?
Again, under the confidentiality of Section 241, disclosing one account could lead to the disclosure of that account, either directly or indirectly. So unfortunately, we can't disclose that amount.
I understand. So did the government break the law previously when it made those disclosures? You don't have to answer that. That's fine. But if you're open to it, I would love to see the legal opinion on which the change in policy was based. We're here today primarily because of that legal opinion, because Parliament has not been able to get that information, which I think is in the public interest to disclose. Next question. Are you able to provide an amount in total that has been written off as a result of carousel schemes? These are the schemes, the GST schemes that are frauds perpetrated on the CRA. There was a number of articles about these a few years ago. The rumors are there are hundreds of millions of dollars in total have been defrauded by the CRA. Do you have a ballpark figure that you can share with the committee?
Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, we are unable to respond to that question. Our systems track the write-offs that we do in accordance with the legislation under which they are written off.
Thank you. So we used to know the largest write-offs, single largest write-offs. We don't know those anymore. And we know we're unable to determine the total amounts of write-offs that are for various activities. I think this is, I'll just reiterate, a matter of public interest. I'm not asking you to whether you agree with it or not, but I'm making a point that this is information that I think is relevant to the public, and taxpayers, I think, and parliamentarians, frankly, deserve to know who these individuals, and I say individuals, but I mean corporations, who they are. I understand there may be some concerns with privacy. I don't know if anyone can speak to this, but if a corporate name appears on a registry today, on a public document, is it not already the case that someone can search in publicly available registries who the directors are of that corporation, whether it's a provincially registered entity or a federal registered entity?
If this was disclosed and then you took that entity and went to all the registries across the provinces, there are different levels of information.
So you could find out just by the name of a corporation, even a numbered corporation, whether it's provincially registered or federally, the directors of that organization are listed, typically listed in a public registry. That's correct? That's your understanding?
Correct. Directors and in some cases shareholders.
That's correct, exactly. So I would be willing to hear concerns about privacy, but if someone's full name appears as their corporate name, I don't think the disclosure of that name would be a violation of the Privacy Act in the first instance. But even if someone believed it was violating privacy, the fact that I can take that corporate name and search it in another public database to produce that individual's name, I think makes the privacy point irrelevant. So I say, I'm open to hearing or being persuaded on that point, but I think we will need to get some legal opinions, certainly from the Privacy Commissioner, by the way, who I reached out to and haven't heard back from, but I know you don't represent that office, but if there are concerns, I would appreciate having those spelled out at the earliest opportunity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And now, Mr. McKinnon for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by saying I'm largely supportive, I'm sympathetic of the goals of this legislation, although I have some concerns about whether or not it can be achieved. I'd start with my first point. I'm not sure this is a point for officials or for our sponsor who might want to come up with amendments coming forward. The first thing is that this legislation is to create a registry, but it's completely silent on where that data comes from. Is it up to the government to make the entries in the registry, to maintain the registry, to update it, or is it up to the individual, to the corporations, partnerships, or whatever? So I think that's key. I mean, if nobody's responsible for it, then it's not going to happen. And if it's the individual companies or corporations or partnerships, there needs, I think, to be some sort of incentive for doing so, or perhaps disincentives for not doing so. So that may be my first point. So I don't know if that's something you want to respond to, whether that's relevant to you guys.
No, thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. We appreciate the question. So I guess essentially I would say that if the bill is passed in its current form, I think the government would be in a position to determine the most appropriate way for the registry to be presented based on the specific reporting requirements of the final bill. Currently, the Public Accounts of Canada already provide this information at an aggregate or at a summarized level. What it doesn't do is provide it at a case-by-case level. So yes, there would be work required by departments to collect that information.
So you would see that it is, under the legislation as written, it would be under the responsibility of the government to put the information in there and to maintain it?
Based on the current form of the bill, that is our current interpretation, yes.
I see, okay. My next point goes to the cost. So we have, had some discussion in this place around the cost of data systems and so forth. So I guess it'd be worth hearing about the cost for the analysis to create the system, the design of it, the analysis, deciding where it's going to live, what servers it's going to live on, how it's maintained, and what the cost of that would be on a long-term basis. I think that would be very key to the system, and it's also significant because I think that bills that require the government to spend money require royal assent. So I'm not sure that the proponent has acquired that yet. So I would ask if you'd like to respond to that concern.
So currently, in accordance with the Financial Administration Act, information in relation to debt deletion is reported at the aggregate level in the Public Accounts of Canada. There is currently no centralized system for the collection of this information. So yes, there would be a need to have a system in place, procedures produced by likely the Treasury Board and Secretariat of Canada, guidance, and then departments would be responsible for extraction and verification of that information. However, it's difficult to say what that would cost.
But I think that's a really key thing. Is it $1,000? Is it $1 million? Is it $100,000? The government is going to be faced with spending a considerable amount of money to make this happen, to do the analysis, to do the development, to do the implementation, to maintain it on an ongoing basis. And it would be helpful, I think, to have some idea of what that would be. Yeah. So, okay, so, and failing that, I mean, certainly private members' bills, all bills need royal assent if they're going to require the government to spend money. So I would encourage the proponent to seek that if it hasn't done so already. And with that, that's my questions. That's it.
Right. Mr. Lemire pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Lemire for 6 minutes.
Présence aujourd'hui.
Thank you for being here today.
Question.
I'd like to ask you a question as to how many businesses would be affected by the law based on this if the amount were set at $1 million. Thank you for your question.
Excuse. In respect to corporations that have had tax debt write-offs over $1 million, and I'm sorry, I can only speak to CRA's tax debt write-offs. I can't speak to total write-offs as the public accounts for other departments. But in looking at the CRA, on average, and this is an estimate because some of the accounts would require more details and more information to just confirm that they are in fact corporate debts. But on average, over the last 7 fiscal years, the number of write-offs that exceeded the $1 million threshold is approximately 215 accounts per year.
C'est beaucoup. Est-ce que vous avez le détail si on allait par tranche d'informations?
Do you have the detail if we go through by amount? So let's say that the amount was 250,000 and then that amount would be higher. Do you have that data? Yes. $250,000. I'm sorry.
1,400 accounts.
Hey, c'est beaucoup, beaucoup d'argent quand même. Et si c'était fixé à...
Quite a lot of money. So if it was, let's say, 5 million or 10 million, do you have the data for that? Yes, I have the information for 5, but not for 10. Okay, let's take 10 then, 5 then. So that would be about 37 accounts at $5 million. It's rather a lot of money. It feels like you could get a whole new program going with all that. Now, according to Public Accounts Section 2, Volume 3, we get a total of 7 billion in debt and in doubtful credits, and another 7 billion in GST and in other taxes, excise tax, immigration, without any information at all. It's really a lot of money. At one point, should the debt be made public, according to you?
So debts are written off. Officers have taken all steps necessary to verify whether or not the debt is collectible. So as my colleague mentioned earlier, there are debt write-off regulations. Our collections and verification branch follow those regulations, take all of the steps possible in determining whether or not the amounts are collectible, and at such point where they determine they are no longer collectible, then they are put forward for write-off and approved at appropriate levels.
En 2024, un article du Globe and Mail a démontré
2024, a Globe and Mail article said that 11 businesses were responsible for $1.25 billion in write-offs and waivers, and 1 billion out of 5 billion, and only 5 cases here. I want to ask you this question again. Why do we refuse to identify the companies in question? They are hiding themselves behind a law that allows them to do this. So let's not redo history and put in and help the person who is hiding behind his debts instead of the proper taxpayers.
That led to the decision to not disclose those amounts, so I'm unable to speak to the reasons as to why.
Ben, on a avec nous il me semble qu'il y avait quelqu'un.
We have the director, Madame Brault. Could you tell us a little bit more, since you are an expert? Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. We cannot give legal advice to this committee, nor can we comment as to the accuracy of laws that have been voted in. But right now, Article 241 does not allow us to disclose this information. Unfortunately, I cannot give you more information. But the adoption of 241 gives you extra powers, no, to get more transparency for Quebecers and Canadians. Well, that would mean that I have to give a legal opinion through the interpretation, and this is not part of our regulation framework right now, and we are not administering it this right now, and I am not authorized to give you any legal opinions on the matter. I accept your answer, but I still thought it was important to ask. So Chrysler and General Motors are interesting examples. After having saved these two American companies, we amassed a debt of $2.6 billion. And this was just a small line in public accounts, an identification of companies, but without any justification as to the loss for taxpayers. How can the taxpayers trust the system when they see large companies such as this benefit from remissions? So we know that there are scandals that have been made about this and in Quebec with other companies. So if we don't identify people and companies, how can we possibly fix the errors of the past? Thank you for the question. I can answer.
In the public accounts. So yes, there was approximately $2.6 billion in loans to Chrysler and General Motors, which were recorded in the 2018 public accounts as write-offs. So I would say, from my interpretation of this bill, that if this bill was to be implemented, that those names would be disclosed. But I'll pass to my colleagues to see if there's further questions or comments.
Merci d'être ici pour répondre à nos questions. Merci.
Thank you for being here to answer our questions.
Rien à rajouter, Madame la Présidente. Merci.
Nothing else to add. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Monsieur Detel for the second round, 5 minutes.
Monsieur Detel, 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. I congratulate you on your French, and I really appreciate all of the efforts you are making to learn both official languages. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, dear colleagues, for being here and all the services you give Canada, as you know, that we are in favor of this bill, and we think that this is an excellent idea. First of all, I'd like to ask you,
Des 10 dernières années.
in the last 10 years, has there been an increase in the number of agreements of this type? Not specifically related to events, but the number of amounts and agreements, or has there been any variation in the last 10 years?
When we're looking at the amount of write-offs, the value of the write-offs has increased over the past 10 years. However, the revenue generated by the agency has also increased over that period of time. And so we see a corresponding increase in write-offs with the increase in revenue.
Okay.
When we look at the write-offs as the percentage of total revenue that the agency generates, it's very consistent year over year. In fact, our write-off percentage in 2024-2025 as a percent of revenue was 0.66%, and over the past 10 years, we've fluctuated between 0.63% and 0.79%. So although the dollar value is increasing, that increase is corresponding to the growth in revenues that the agency is administering.
Well, it's like if you have seen the question that I want to ask to you. Thank you so much. Deeply appreciate. I would suggest the government to follow this way to address it. Obviously, it's a funny thing. Okay, another question about that. Is that the same thing? Est-ce que c'est le même? Est-ce que vous avez?
Did you happen to see a number of increases in the number of cases? Inflation follows everything, but are there more cases than there were previously, or is it the same year after year?
Excuse me, I'm just checking my notes to see if...
Façon de faire, de bien prendre le temps tant qu'à parler ou tant.
Absolutely, you're doing the right thing, taking the necessary time to answer properly. Yes, I have information for the last 3 years, and we can see a small increase in the number of cases every year, but totally, generally speaking, totally it's about the same number. So what are the reasons given by companies in order to get the write-offs? Because I assume that it is the companies that come to you and make the first steps. Is it actually the companies that come to you, or is it the other way around? Companies aren't aware. These are administrative measures, and they take the account out of our inventory because the account is still recoverable. So they're completely not involved when it comes to the write-offs. Yes, but what reason makes you act this way? Well, we verify what all of their revenues are, their assets, liabilities, and when we find no other means of recovering the money and there is no contact, well, at that point, is there a period of time, a predefined period of time, let's say after 10 years, that when you proceed to the write-off, would you do it immediately? Now, it's on a case-by-case basis. We do research and we do what we can. It can take years. And if we find that it's very difficult to recover the money after all the research, then the amount will be reduced. And if there are actions taken against company directors or shareholders because they are jointly responsible, and then we will go to the third parties, and that will take longer. And if they appeal, that will take longer as well. And then we will just suppress the account and write it off. So how many employees are dedicated only to those sorts of files? The more complex files, the exceptional ones, we might deploy 1,000. Do you have any particular goals that you need to reach? No, we have expectations, but recovery agents manage their accounts just like any other account. They will identify all assets, but they don't have any particular objective to say, okay, I have to do this within 5 days and then do a write-off now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Just a clarification, I understand with the legislation regulations that even if you were to write off a debt obligation, that it doesn't prevent you from seeking recourse at some point in the future should the company or individual have the means to do so. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. One of the concerns, and I am generally supportive of this bill. I see room for improvement. One of the concerns I have is that C-230 does not distinguish between a debt obligation versus a waiver or forgiveness. I would ask, and I guess either of the witnesses could perhaps elaborate on this, but I would suggest that there's perhaps room for improvement there in distinguishing one versus the other. And something that quickly comes to mind: if government entered into a contract with a business, for example, to set up an operation, create jobs, create employment, and there was a forgivable loan, if government were to write that loan off, the bill as it's written, would this company, for example, have to be identified and reported? And that may or may not be the case, but I'm just wondering, because it may not be a good look for a company if they've met their obligations, they've lived up to their contractual arrangement with government, therefore the loan or the debt is forgiven, and they're written up that identified in a registry for having a loan written off. Can anybody elaborate on that?
So from my read of Bill C-230, the proposed amendment under 25(1) of the Financial Administration Act would include any debt, obligation, or claim in a whole or all in part that has been waived, written off, or forgiven. So it would include those.
Yeah. So I see, and hopefully, Mr. Chambers, you're open to some sort of an amendment that would distinguish between a debt obligation and the forgiveness of a loan, so that if we have a company that is living up to their obligation, creating the employment or setting up an operation, that they don't show up on a registry and somebody could construe them as maybe being a bad actor. Just wondering, the technical and operational concerns with the legislation as well. And again, I'm supportive of this legislation, but anytime you change legislation, there are changes to operations, and some of those can have a domino effect or an impact on the operations of government departments or the revenue agency. Can the witnesses provide, so that when we go to make amendments or suggest amendments to this legislation, what some of those implications may be?
Thank you very much for the question. With respect to the administration of this, the number of accounts does change depending on the thresholds, and that will change the administrative effort required by the agency in looking into and verifying that all of these accounts would comply with all of the requirements of the bill when it is passed, in whatever format it is passed. Unfortunately, I can't speak to my opinions on the bill or possible amendments, but just wanted to give that context that the level of accounts does change the administrative effort for the department. Thank you.
Does the revenue agency currently have the capacity, if this bill were adopted as it is, do you have the capacity to make the necessary changes and adapt to the changes, or what additional resources would you require to meet that administrative burden?
Thank you. At this time, we have not looked into the cost of administering this bill, as it has not yet been passed. So similar to my colleague who had mentioned before that we hadn't done a full evaluation, it's the same at the agency. We'd have to look into the cost to administer the bill as written. Thank you.
Okay. Do you have, is there an anticipated timeline to be able to give us some indication as to what the administrative burden would be with the passage of this bill?
Thank you for the question. Madame la Présidente, on devra attendre que le projet de loi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we'd have to first of all wait for the bill to actually be passed with any amendments and then carry out an evaluation.
Okay. I would be interested in,
Thank
having
you.
some understanding of the staffing requirements, the logistics in order for the agency as well as government departments to be able to meet the demands of passage of this. Do we have any indication, and not looking for a specific number, but I guess just in general terms, the burden to, maybe I should change the wording because I am generally supportive of the legislation, but the requirement to maintain a registry, what does that look like?
A very, very short answer.
Thank you for the question. Ça va nécessiter certainement des ressources.
Well, it'll certainly require resources, human resources, changes in systems. We're talking about something that is going to have an impact, and it will be a material impact.
Monsieur Lemire pour 2 minutes et demie.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Mr. Lemire, 2.5 minutes. Thank you. In the ESDC had gotten 2.7 of the $1 billion. In the meantime, Export and that was managing the emergency account did not want to identify the companies that were not the beneficiaries, and the Auditor General estimated that the money was deemed inadmissible. Do you think that adds to how important it is for all Canadians to be equal in front of the law?
Merci pour votre question, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you for your question, Madam Chair. We're talking, the member here is talking about something that is about another ministry, so I cannot give you any answers on that particular file. You're quite right. But nevertheless, it leads us to ask ourselves the question that saying that the CRA can prosecute taxpayers, but why not companies? Why 2 different rules? Why different rules for different people? Because just because the information isn't disclosed, how can we know that the work is actually going to carry out so that everybody be equal in front of the law and we do the absolute maximum to get the money back that has been loaned to these companies? And we're talking here about very large amounts.
Pour votre question, je comprends l'importance de l'enjeu.
I understand how important the issue is, but we cannot make any comments. Yes. So during the pandemic, many loans were given to companies, and I just want to understand. So some of them were forgivable depending on certain conditions. So are we talking about sums that were actually remissions, or were they forgiveness? Were they write-offs? Were they waivers?
Merci pour la question. I don't have a list.
Thank you.
This is for those individual organizations.
Merci. Ben, essentiellement, puisqu'il me reste seulement 15 secondes, ben, je pense que, merci. Je pense que vous avez répondu de façon.
I only have 15 seconds, and I think you've answered as transparently and honestly as possible, but it explains how important that it is to have this bill so that we can go ahead with such important work.
Currick for 5 minutes.
Thank you all for being here today. I will concede about a minute of my time to my colleague, MP Chambers. At the beginning here, there were some questions that you couldn't disclose, and I fully respect that, and that's, you have to do what you have to do. But I will ask each of the departments whether or not, in your expert opinions, that a debt forgiveness public registry of these corporations, that if this bill went through, would create more transparency for the Canadian public. And we could start with you, Mr. Daly, if that's okay.
Thank you for the question. I left my mic on, so my apologies for that. So I guess I'd say, essentially that the transparency for debt deletion is set out in the Financial Administration Act. And currently, as it's currently set, that this information is included in the public accounts at a summarized but not at a detailed level, as the public accounts currently consist over 3 volumes and about 1,000 pages of data. So essentially, at this point in time, Volume 3, which is unaudited data, does not contain that aggregate level of data. So in terms of it speaking specifically to transparency, I don't think I can comment further on a bill that has not yet been put into law.
Okay, I respect that, sir. I was more asking your opinion, but I respect that.
Okay.
If someone from the CRA could answer?
Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Peut-être en complément d'information, il faut
Just to give you some more information, you need to make a distinction
créances
between bad debts and forgiven debts. If there's in this case, a forgiven debt, there's a lot of transparency, and an order in council is done. It's printed in the Gazette, and the minister can decide to raise the penalty.
And yourself, Mr. Sorry, McLaughlin.
I think there would be, information would be available, but I can only provide technical answers and not personal opinions.
Fair enough, sir. Thank you. I guess what I was trying to say is, just in your opinions, that we try to create, this bill would try to create more transparency to the Canadian public. I respect the way you have to answer, so I won't dig into that anymore. But here is my question, though, another one. What's the benefit of protecting these, the identities of these corporations? I'm going to play devil's advocate, right? We clearly you can't disclose a lot of stuff, but what would be the benefit of protecting some identities and these corporations, I should say? I don't want to reference people. We're talking about corporations when they are excused of paying multi-millions of dollars. If someone from CRA could answer.
Thank you for the question. En ce qui concerne les dettes d'impôt,
With respect to tax-related debts, it's parliamentarians who have a piece of legislation that obliges us to provide confidentiality for every taxpayer.
choix conscient.
This is a conscious choice by them.
Okay. Sorry. So we talked about some of the processes of tax write-offs very briefly, because it was in French. If Mr. Norris, if you could, what determines if a debt can be collected or not?
Thank you for the question. What determines if it can be collected or not are the circumstances of the business.
Sorry, for a corporation we're talking.
Corporation,
Yeah.
yes, for a corporation. Individuals is different than a
Yes, sir.
corporation.
Yes,
For a
sir.
corporation, so again, we look at their financial situation, financial statements, what are their assets, are they still operating? If they're not operating anymore, what happened to the assets? We look at the bank accounts, has there been any transfer of assets? So this starts from the bottom, and then when the collection officer can't find those assets and determines that the business is no longer operating, and we do all our searches across the banks, everywhere we can go. We have lots of powers to go look at into the bank accounts and to other assets, third parties, accounts receivables. Once we close all those doors, then we say, okay, there's nothing left to do. Then we determine that account is unrecoverable. And at that point, it goes through many layers of approval before an account over $1 million would end up at the commissioner level for approval. So not just one person making that determination, but lots of people looking over that account.
Okay. Thank you for your answer, sir. At this point, I'd like to concede my time, but I will say, no?
No, I think we're over.
There's 17 seconds left.
Oh, sorry. I apologize. Sorry. I'm good. Thank you. Sorry.
Ms. Tesser-Dirksen for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And my colleagues have been very thorough in their question asking, so a lot of what I wanted to talk about has been touched on already. I do have a few remaining questions, but I'd be happy to give a minute to Mr. Chambers if you would like. Do you want to take it? Go ahead.
Well, that's very kind. Look at this collaboration.
That's right.
Although I don't think I'll be crossing the floor, but just to be clear, as I know there may be some precedent for sharing time and floor crossing, but I appreciate it. Just two quick questions, actually, for our analysts to start. In your research, did you come across whether this bill would need royal proclamation? A royal recommendation, I apologize.
Madam Chair, if I may, thank you very much. With respect, unfortunately, we didn't look into the mechanics of that, but I mean, at a very sort of simple level, if a new product is created, a new requirement that has administrative responsibilities, in addition to what is currently in place, it would stand to reason that some additional resources might be needed in order for that to function. I would then also like to say, on the other hand, though, the Government of Canada is currently, as it exists, it does have infrastructure, it does have IT resources, it does have IT professionals, it does have server space and cloud space and stuff like that. So at some level, it is a marginal, this is again my opinion, but it's a marginal increase in resource allocation. But it is not zero, but it would not necessarily be too comprehensive, I would imagine.
Thank you very much. Second and final question. On this notion that there may be some individuals, corporations listed that may have debts owing that have been waived, forgiven, or written off, in your opinion, since you've read the bill, would it not be possible, as the bill is currently drafted, to include the reason for which that debt was forgiven, i.e., this corporation, it was this amount, and it was waived, forgiven, or written off, to identify what classification of debt was being disposed of? Is that not a possible interpretation of the bill?
Thanks for the question. I can start and I can pass to my colleagues. So I do think I agree CRA is the right person to be at the table to answer that question. I would say that we don't collect this information essentially, but I do think that CRA would have probably the largest amount of work to do to decipher corporation versus non-corporation debt-related write-offs. So I'll pass the question to CRA.
Thank you very much. With respect to the classification of write-offs versus forgiveness or waivers, that information is already in the public accounts. The write-offs under the FAA and the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act are disclosed at the aggregate level. The other information on forgiveness and waivers is combined under the Income Tax Act or the Excise Tax Act as appropriate. I would have to consult with my colleagues who are the experts in those areas on the segregation of that data, unfortunately.
That's okay. Thank you very much, as long as I think it's possible.
Peut-être juste pour ajouter, dans le cas d'une...
Just to add to the answer, in the case of a forgiven debt,
would be required on the behalf of the agency because au fur et à mesure que le dossier avance, vous pouvez avoir...
as the file moves forward, there may be penalties and interest may accrue at the point where the process began late. There are penalties that can increase a little bit later. The minister has the discretion to remove these penalties, and later other penalties may apply. And then at the appeals stage, if the taxpayer has an objection, well, there's a discretion to maintain these penalties or not. And then if the file goes before a court, a judge can change the interest or the penalties. In terms of the creation of a registry, the amount will change over time, and it can happen over the course of many years. And to have an up-to-date registry, you would need to go taxpayer by taxpayer and adjust the amount, as well as giving the reasoning. So it's something that's theoretically possible, but it's not static, and it couldn't just be done one time for a taxpayer. There are many decisions that would be taken over time as the file is studied, in certain cases, of course.
But only just to say that the intention of the bill was actually to capture every single write-off. Doesn't matter if it was for a debt owing or a forgiveness of a loan. that was the intention of the bill, was to capture corporations who have their debts expunged.
Okay. Ms. Tesser-Dirksen, short question.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, and again, I agree in principle with what my opposition colleague has on the table here. I do want to go back, though, to the original point that Mr. Chambers was making around the disclosure of that large write-off. And Mr. Norris, maybe I'll direct at you to start. So just so I understand, it's the disclosure of the actual amount that you're not able to give us, correct?
The disclosure of a single amount, yes.
Okay.
Sorry, yes.
Yes, okay, so the disclosure of the amount is not possible under the policy that you're engaging. Ms. Boudens, and my colleague, Monsieur Lemieux's line of questioning, I'm going to refer to that. Monsieur Lemieux asked you several questions about the number of accounts that would be affected by a 5 million, different kind of staged amounts. So am I to understand, based on your answers, that 37 accounts would be affected by a $5 million threshold?
Thank you for the question. Yes, that's correct. That's an average over the last 7 years.
Okay.
So I just averaged the last 7 fiscal years to come up with what we would see kind of on a regular ongoing basis if we were to have a $5 million threshold. And it's 37 accounts, which
And I'm not trying to, gotcha. We really appreciate the work you do. I'm just trying to flesh out the policy rationale for not disclosing the largest amount. Because, theoretically, if I really wanted to figure out who those 37 accounts were, I now know that there's 37 accounts affected by a $5 million threshold across the country. So you're disclosing some amounts. Do you see what I'm getting at? But you won't disclose the largest amount for fear that it's going to identify or violate some kind of privacy issues. So I'm trying to flesh out the logical basis for why we can understand some numbers from Ms. Boudens, but not the big number from
short
Mr.
answer.
Norris.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I'm rambling.
Thank you for the question. I guess the very short answer is in those 37 accounts, you would not know if one of them was $500 million and 10 of them were $5 million. So there is no single amount that allows you to research and potentially identify the company. Thank you.
Thank you. And now for our final round, we'll start off with Mr. Stevenson, and I will follow the real chair's order and end with the government. Okay, so Mr. Stevenson for 5 minutes.
Thank you. As a chartered professional accountant in public practice, I personally filed thousands of tax returns over the last 26 years. And I'm not sure who really wants to answer this question, but just some of my questions, but I'll probably start with Mr. Daly. So our tax system is fundamentally based on volunteer self-reporting, and Canadians are expected to file accurately with the information, and if they don't, even if it's small mistakes, they're faced with penalties, interest, and they can dispute with CRA for a long period of time. Now, if they didn't have the correct information based on what CRA's put out there, and they still have these problems, who actually pays penalties? Who's responsible for the penalties? Okay, maybe it's a rhetorical question on that end. That's the taxpayer. So when we look at this, from your perspective, and you alluded to it earlier in your opening statement, Mr. Daly, about what is that the CRA is the main function for finance to collect funds. Now, would you say the main purpose of CRA is to be a collection agency, or is it to help taxpayers to file their information correctly with proper information? Are they supposed to be educational and help the taxpayer, or is it really just to collect funds?
No, thank you for the question. I think with having CRA here, they are actually the best place to define the mandate of their organization.
Okay.
To describe it.
Ms. Boudin, there.
Thank you for the question. I'd say the CRA acts as a tax administrator, and part of the administration of those taxes also involve the collection of debts. So we play both roles.
Would you say which one is of the focus, though? That's okay. I'll move on. Mr. Daly, you alluded to earlier that there was and Mr. Osborne's question about what is the administrative burden. And again, it might be a bit of a facetious question, but you said that there's no central systems. There's nothing, CRA doesn't do anything on paper anymore, correct? It's all digital. Correct? Okay. So if the system's all digital and you guys have come to totals earlier, you've got the totals, you've got the numbers. How did you get those numbers if it wasn't already, all the information already there?
If I may, I believe when my colleague, Mr. Daly, was referring to that, he was referring to a centralized system as a whole as opposed to within individual departments, so I'll turn to him.
No, thank you for the question. I appreciate it. So certainly right now, like the responsibility for write-offs or debt deletion is mostly within each individual department. Right now, the Treasury Board hasn't put in a requirement for departments to provide.
Just to say CRA's got a different list than the corporate tax, and you're just saying to amalgamate those, that's where the extra burden would be in the list.
No, I appreciate that. So I can't speak to all individual departments. I think an assessment would need to be done on a department by department basis to determine to what degree this would require additional work. There would be some requirements.
All right, that's fine. I guess on a theoretical basis, I reject the premise that there's extra administrative burden because all the information's there. It's just putting a list together. So maybe this, I'm not sure who this will be for CRA, but as a corporation, a lot of times you'll get a notice. They'll send out a notice, say file your taxes, then they'll send out a notice saying, we think you owe X, whether it's GST or corporate tax, in your notional assessments. Can you tell me by your information how many times or what portion of is being written off that was a notional assessment from CRA guessing, and then the corporation goes back, actually files their taxes, and the taxes are significantly different? How much of these write-offs are actually included in this notional assessments, or are they at all?
Thank you for the question. If the CRA issued a notional assessment and the taxpayer came back and filed their actual
Correct,
taxes,
yeah.
they would be reassessed, and that would be updated in the system for the actual taxes owed.
But is that difference between the notional and the actual assessment any part of this write-off?
No, the reassessment would update the amount owing in the system, and then the amount that would go to collections would be the amount owing from the amount that was filed
So
by the corporation.
the amounts that are showing up as written off never include those adjustments that they had prior to the final assessment.
Correct. The amounts that go to collections are the amounts that are owed by the taxpayer. So if they have filed, it would reflect the amounts that are owed by the taxpayer.
Okay. Okay. How much time?
Time is up.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Okay. Monsieur Lemire pour 2 minutes et demi.
Mr. Lemire for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Exportation and Development Canada is a Crown Corporation. The CRA isn't. The CRA has collected amounts that were provided to ineligible businesses, but Export Development Canada, no. Why can the CRA do its work to recover sums, but Export Development Canada can't? And I think this is some unfair for the taxpayer. We're talking about $3.5 billion. This is not unfair. Or is this not unfair for the taxpayer? And shouldn't it be corrected?
Un processus qui appartient.
Formulate an opinion on something that belongs to another Crown Corporation. Yes, true, but nevertheless, you have certain powers. I would like to ask you about privacy. A company is under several laws. For instance, a company has to be registered with Company Register, like we do in Quebec. So why is it an issue of privacy laws when the shareholders are already in public information? Why do you refuse to give certain information about the case when the company is making money and is not respecting its obligations?
Question.
Thank you for the question.
The Act prohibits disclosure of any taxpayer information. So it's, I think, as one of the members was explaining, it's a self-reporting tax system which encourages full disclosure in order to collect tax on income and for the CRA to be able to verify. So by law, the CRA cannot share taxpayer information unless it's subject to an exception in Section 241 of the Income Tax Act. That's just within our tax laws. And then beyond that, there are other privacy laws, but I can't speak to those.
OK, merci. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Speaker is Mr. McKinnon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My concern about this bill, which I addressed earlier, was, as Mr. Stevenson said, the information is already out there. It's a matter of reporting, it's a matter of gathering it. But what this bill asks us to do is create a public registry in the form of an online searchable database. To my mind, that's a separate entity. It's a separate system. It requires analysis, it requires design. And we're going to require someone to go through the existing data and gather it on some basis of some time and put it into this into this database, and then make it available for the public to do a search in various ways. I guess I'd be much more comfortable if this bill was talking about creating an ongoing report, report every quarter, every year or something that said, here's the information, we'll put it in a report and we'll make it available to the public. So is there anyone who'd like to comment on that concept?
No, thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I appreciate the question. So I think we would, upon the completion of this bill, we would need to determine exactly how it will be produced, whether it be within the Public Accounts of Canada or within another online searchable database, such as what you would find with Open Government. So in terms of the frequency, I think that would need to be assessed upon which time the bill is approved.
So I come at this from a perspective of I spent 40 years as a data analyst and a computer programmer. I've worked in Fortran and even COBOL, which I'm not proud of. And I've had experience with implementing systems of this kind and making it available to users and so on and so forth. So I anticipate this is going to be a fairly expensive thing to create. It would be much easier, much more straightforward, I would suggest to Mr. Chambers, if this was expressed in a manner of an ongoing report. And I know that you guys are interested in what's the final form of this bill, but in the bill as it sits right now, let's forget about changes. We may or may not make changes. As the bill stands right now, what are the consequences? What are the financial consequences of implementing this bill as it stands?
Yeah, again, we haven't done an analysis of what would be the financial implications of the plan of the amendment. My apologies. Right now, I think that in terms of additional work, all departments would need to assess to what degree they would need to assess their write-offs and debt deletions to determine what is required to provide this information in a central database.
What about the prospect of providing this information? Forget about the bill. Say, listen, we'd like a report from you guys on a quarterly basis or a semi-annual basis or something that says, here's a list of these entities who have debts to the government, and this is the status of those debts, whether they're forgiven or written off, or even a report of these various entities, and here's a list of documents, or here's a list of obligations that have been or are about to be written off.
Thank you for the question. So if a report was required, it would follow, I think, the similar circumstances that would be with an online database, with the exception of having to house a system in order to be able to have the information available online. I'm not sure if CRA has anything to add in terms of distinguishing between, say, for example, partnerships and individuals for certain types of debt deletions, for example, GST or HST.
Short answer, please.
Thank you. I think just as mentioned earlier, there is work involved. We have to verify that GST accounts are actually registered to corporations before they can be disclosed on this list.
Thank you to our witnesses for their testimony and participation in relation to the study of Bill C-230. Thank you so much. And we will suspend briefly to go in camera.
Juste...
Meeting is resumed in public.
Point d'ordre, Madame la Présidente.
Oui.
Madame la
So, point of order, Madam Chair. I would like to inform the committee that we have a gentleman's agreement with the ministerial members as well as the member of the Bloc Québécois, so that the motion that I tabled a few days ago concerning the Laval elements and the CRA, a motion which invites the Minister of the Finance and the National Revenue, as well as the administration of the CRA to this discussion, and discussion will happen at the next committee meeting.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Lors de la dernière rencontre, nous n'avons pas eu le temps.
Madam Chair, during our last meeting, we didn't have time to do the final vote on the motion tabled by myself and the block on February 25th, 2026. The motion is as follows: that the committee reports to the House to ask the government to do a public inquiry on cost overruns in IT, including Phoenix, ArriveCAN, and the modernization of payments. And so we were supposed to do a vote, and we didn't have enough time, so I would, of course, like us to be able to do the vote.
Vote to resume debate.
Il n'y a pas de vote pour résumer le débat. Le débat se poursuit.
There's no debate to resume. There's no vote to resume the debate. The debate will continue.
Présidente, je demande le vote.
Madam Chair, I'm asking for a vote.
The motion. Of the motion. Yeah. Okay.
Mr. McKinnon? Mr. Osborne?
Yes.
Ms. Tesser-Dirksen?
Yes.
Monsieur Dautin?
C'est bien pour la motion de l'amendement ou bien la motion? C'est un amendement qui était...
This is for the amendment or for the motion? Was there an amendment table?
Yes.
It's already done?
It's to be able to resume debate.
Eh bien, oui.
Mr. Couric?
I should just, this keeps falling.
Yes.
Mrs. Kuzi?
In favor.
Et Monsieur Lemire?
Oui.
Okay, we are now resuming debate on the motion.
Is there
Any speakers? Oh, okay.
I think we,
Ms. Tesser-Dirksen
And Monsieur Lemire?
and Monsieur Lemire.
Thanks so much, Madam Chair. And I want to thank my colleagues for indulging me in the last meeting while I waxed maybe not so eloquently about my feelings about the motion. The gist of what I was trying to say was that I was hoping for something more holistic, right? That I agreed in principle with the motion. I didn't like the focus on the Phoenix and that stuff, that I thought it was distracting and not as holistic or organic as it could be. And after thinking about it a bit, I decided I'll propose a motion, an amendment to the motion. If that's okay, Madam Chair, do you want me to launch into that?
Yes.
I'm going to read the whole proposed amendment at the end because I do have some comments I want to preface it with. But basically, what I'm looking to do is remove, quote, a public and, end quote, remove, quote, overruns, end quote, and then add, quote, and that the inquiry also examine the accumulated costs of maintaining legacy systems and the risks associated with them. And I'll get into my rationale a little bit here because I feel like if my colleague, Monsieur Le Maire, is truly concerned about the IT contracts, then this amendment should work for him. Because really it's looking at spending in a serious, responsible, and more holistic way. We don't just want to necessarily examine the contracts, but also the enormous costs that there are in maintaining outdated, older systems, because there's a cost associated with that. I think if you want to have an honest conversation, we can't ignore, decades of accumulated costs that have been poured into maintaining these outdated technologies. And I said in my comments last meeting, taxpayers deserve a complete picture, not just what modernization costs, but what failing to maintain it costs, because there's a cost associated with being outdated. And I wasn't here for the witnesses in those meetings, but every witness who appeared before the committee, including the Auditor General and other deputy ministers, made it clear that those aging systems are at the heart of delays, risks, and expense, like rising costs. So, and I just want to quickly kind of touch on some of the previous testimony as well. And intervene anytime, Madam Chair, if I need to break things up, because I know I read a bunch of amendments at the beginning. Maybe it's better if I deal with them individually. Okay. Can I make my points and then I'll go back to the technical bits of the motion, the amendment? So the BDM, the benefit modernization, it's the largest, from what I understand, the largest and most carefully governed IT transformation in federal history. So the testimony we heard showed that every step has been sequenced, piloted, tested, and is monitored. It's very thorough. It protects vulnerable Canadians. It avoids Phoenix-style mistakes, and this is something that my colleague was concerned about. He wanted those mistakes addressed. I think that was really at the crux of the whole motion. It prioritizes modernization over riskier transformations, and it's going to replace systems that are older than the internet. I don't know if people remember when they first heard about the internet, but I was pretty young. Like, this is old technology. The Auditor General's office made it pretty clear that Canada relies on systems that are in many cases more than 60 years old right now. Those systems deliver benefits to more than 10 million people. There's a lot of people relying on these systems to work properly, and we can't allow them to fail. And the Auditor General's office confirmed that the old systems pose increasing risks and that modernization today prevents catastrophic failures tomorrow. We do have to invest in updating and modernizing technology if we want it to work properly for us. BDM, I don't think, is optional. It's a long-delayed modernization that protects Canadians' access to pensions, to employment insurance, and to old age security, some of which people that I love depend on, and I'm sure many folks around this table. The delays in modernizing the system that existed for decades before this government are exactly why BDM is structured, sequenced, and very carefully managed. And vulnerable Canadians depend on these products, the programs the most. And this is exactly why the modernization is structured to protect continuity above all else. So instead of rushing to an immediate launch of the BDM, it's migrating the highest risk systems first, starting with old age security to prevent any disruptions to seniors. And I know this is of particular concern to our colleagues in the bloc and to all of us. The legacy system did do its job for decades, but there comes a time, and we can't rely on 60-year-old code to keep pace with the needs of seniors and families today. And I want to make sure there's distinguishing between Phoenix and the benefits delivery modernization, the BDM. Because we heard from officials in 2023 that there were many lessons learned from Phoenix, and it's important we don't forget those lessons. BDM is not meant to cut corners, it's not reducing scope recklessly, and it's not implementing changes without full and thorough testing. BDM is designed to avoid Phoenix by ensuring system migration happens progressively with safeguards and real-time oversight. So I want to make sure that that distinction is quite clear. And although I didn't have a chance to hear from her, the former Chief Information Officer, Catherine Luello, who I understand was well respected around this committee table, she did provide testimony, and the committee heard that the now former CIO from her that the BDM program is finally imposing standardization, finally. One shared platform instead of dozens of bespoke, incompatible systems that were inefficient. And additionally, she pointed out that this unified approach is how we avoid future Phoenix-type fragmentation and issues. So this is where I'm coming from with this amendment. So I'll read the whole amendment. Would you like that, Madam Chair?
Yes, please read the whole amendment, and just this amendment, please.
Just this amendment, okay. So the final motion would read as such, okay? Sorry, you just want my amendment? Okay, I read that at the beginning. It's just two little sentences and adding a bit at the end.
One amendment at a time.
Okay, so the first amendment.
One amendment at a time, yeah.
First amendment, okay? So this is there's a spot where it says a public and. A public and. Do you see that? I'll pull it up. Do you see it? Yes. Okay, so I want to remove that. I want to remove the word overruns. And at the end, I would request that we add the following. And that the inquiry also examine the accumulated costs of maintaining legacy systems and the risks associated with them.
Okay.
Do you want me to read the final
Could you repeat one
proposed-
more time, please?
Do you want me to read the whole proposed final motion or go through those three amendments again individually?
Just the last part.
The last part? Okay. The addition at the end? As follows. And that the inquiry also examine the accumulated costs of maintaining legacy systems and the risks associated with them.
Okay. All right. Okay. Any speakers to the amendment? Mr. Lemire and then Monsieur Detel. And, sorry, and of course, Mr. McKinnon. Thank you.
Madame la Présidente, je vais être honnête avec vous.
Madam Chair, I'm going to be honest with you. During our last meeting, I had a few doubts whether the Liberals were acting in good faith, and I was wondering whether it was they were filibustering. But now it's clear. What do the Liberals want, or what do we want from the Liberals? They want to hide information that should be made public in the case of Curum. And I don't want to be taken for an imbecile, and Quebecers don't want to be taken for imbeciles. Canadians don't want that to be the case either. We're talking about cost overruns. If the budget had been adhered to, if it had really cost $1.75 billion, then no one would be questioning the idea of modernizing a system. The problem is clear. It's the fact that we went from $1.75 billion to $6.6 billion. And cost overrun of more than $5 billion. $5 billion of money that we could have used for any other program. For example, improving benefits for seniors. And there are major problems with the system, according to the department's own numbers. And this is how we learn that it has to do with 85,000 cases because the program was badly built. It was badly built because firms provided improper advice on the design of this program, and those people are profiting from this because we're talking about $3.5 billion that was budgeted and that it's being given to IT firms. So that's why we're talking about a fiasco, and it is clearly an IT fiasco. The motion, as amended, does not take into consideration the current motion talks about cost overruns in IT, among which there's Phoenix, ArriveCan, the Benefits Delivery Modernization, and there's others as well, Madam Chair. And I hope that in reporting to the House, and we're not talking about a study, we're talking about reporting to the House to ask for an inquiry, and we're awaiting word from the AG on further studies, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were other IT fiascos that end up appearing because the federal government refuses to take a look at its mistakes when it comes to contracts with private firms, with independent firms, with IT firms. And that means that these people are profiting from this behavior of the government, and then they're putting money in their own pockets. We're talking about 3.5 billion. And so I, of course, reject the proposal made by the Liberal government, and they're refusing to be transparent. And when it comes to a public inquiry, just for the member opposite's information, these are not words that are chosen at random. We here refer to the Public Inquiry Act, Section 2, which asks for a judge to take a look at the matter, and it involves budgets to organize the inquiry. The goal is to depoliticize an issue like this one because it's a scandal. It is a fiasco. It cost $5 billion in overruns compared with what was budgeted. So, can we get this out of the political sphere so that competent people like a judge can get to the bottom of things and bring to light the mandate that was provided and why there were such significant problems? And perhaps this goes beyond the abilities of Parliament. Yes, studies were done in this committee, and the Auditor General became interested in the subject. And I'd like to add something, Madam Chair. During question period, we asked the Prime Minister questions, and the slightest rigor on his behalf would have been to not refer to the absence of people at a meeting that didn't happen. We were convened this morning for an information meeting tomorrow. The meeting hasn't yet happened. So, to answer me without the right of response, and that is the principle of question period, to say that I wasn't present at a meeting, I believe that this is an egregious lack of respect that shows the extent to which the Liberals want to hide something. And we've got a good idea of what they're trying to hide. And that's why we want to bring to light issues regarding these programs, because it's constantly happening. And this committee's responsibility is to approve this motion that asks us to report to the House in order to bring to light information on IT contracts, these fiascos that are happening year over year. Can we bring these things to light? I think that's what taxpayers expect, and that's what we're asking for, and we'd like it to be done as soon as possible. Mr. Dittel. Thank you, Madam Chair. We disagree with the suggestion for the amendment made from the minister colleague. No one is questioning the fact that we need to modernize the system. Let me remind you that the first warning happened in 2014. So it didn't happen yesterday, and we know very well that everything to do with IT, well, things in IT become obsolete very quickly. So, of course, it goes without saying, we all agree that we needed to act. And it was in 2014 that the message was sent. In 2015, there was a new government, but we had a little while before the process started. And what we see now is that things aren't working. And yes, the government talks about all these great results, but it's irrelevant given that it was supposed to cost 1.6 billion and it ended up costing 5 billion more. And we're talking about 85,000 people who have been failed by this system. And Madam Chair, I'd like to remind you that these people are our seniors, people who built this country, and we owe them a great deal. And they weren't born in the computer age like my children, who are extremely adept, much more so than me. And I think we're all basically in this situation. So we need to worry about seniors. Yesterday on Radio-Canada, there was a story that showed real cases of people in Gaspésie, someone in Victoriaville who was dealing with these problems. And the member for Victoriaville, sorry, I can't remember the exact name of the riding, Mr. Lefebvre, asked a question in the House to the minister, and who said, this person in my riding is listening to you, so give me an answer. And the answer came, and Madam Chair, It's 85,000 people who are suffering as a result of the situation, continue to suffer. So our goal is not to recognize that if we hadn't done this, this is the price we would have paid. No, everyone agrees with that. It was necessary. But what we're saying is that there was a $5 billion overrun. And if I can reassure my ministerial colleague, this doesn't just happen in Canada. It happens throughout the world. And in La Presse, there was an article, and I believe it was yesterday, the day before, and it said that in a number of countries there are cost overruns that are significant in terms of IT. And we don't need to look at what's happening in Europe. We just need to look at what's happening here in Quebec. There was SACLIC, the car insurance system in Quebec was supposed to have a major modernization, but there were significant overruns and problems, and 2 ministers had to resign as a result of this problem. So, Madam Chair, this is not trying to make political capital, but when a budget ends up costing $5 billion more, when 85,000 people are affected, when the cost overruns are just the usual way of doing things. The fact that we're seeing these IT cost overruns, well, in Ottawa, the time has now come to take a look at this file and to get to the bottom of things, as was done in Quebec and as has been done throughout the world where these situations arise that mean that when we start to take a look at expenditures in IT, then they end up being enormous. So it's necessary for the future. It's necessary to understand what's happening, and we need to avoid repeating the same error. So once again, to conclude, with respect to the amendment proposed by our colleague, everyone understands that yes, a change was necessary, but it's the change that was an enormous expenditure and didn't give the results that we wanted. So we're going to oppose the amendment.
Thank you. Let me start by mentioning that I do remember the start of the internet. We had no idea before what was coming. So, but I do take umbrage with the notion that we are trying to hide any information. There's nothing whatsoever in this amendment that reduces the scope of the original amendment. What it does is add context, and I think that's important to do. I think it's very important that we take a look at these prior systems, these legacy systems, and find out where they went wrong. If we don't know where they went wrong, how are we going to know how to fix them? But I think it's helpful. It's very helpful if we can amend the scope or the context to, as Ms. Tessa Dirksen has proposed, and therefore I will support this amendment.
Are there any more speakers on the amendment? No? Okay, let's call a vote.
Mr. McKinnon? Mr. Osborne?
Yes.
Ms. Tesser Dirksen?
Yes.
Monsieur Datel?
Ma réponse est non.
Mr. Couric?
No.
Mrs. Kuzi?
No.
Monsieur Lemire?
Contre.
3 yeas, 4 nays.
The amendment has been defeated. Let's go back to the original motion, and I believe that Monsieur Lemire has the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The essential, most
Ça veut dire.
I said is what I've said. So what does $6.6 billion in cost overruns really mean? So I'm going to go back to the article of Aid Radio Canada. We're talking about 13,000 homes. We're talking about 3,300 civil servants who could have worked with an average of $160,000 with contributions to their pension. They could have worked between 2017 to 2031 on one a modernization of a IT project. We're talking about IT who ask for the biggest experts, like Brent, it cost $1 billion to make, all inclusive. And that was the most demanding when it came to modern IT. We're talking about 3 times the Champlain Bridge in terms of costs. So that's how much they went in cost offering. So the Échelle Current, we knew that they had huge problems in Australia, in 5 states, and in Ontario. So the AG has told us, raise the red flag. And the ESDC decided 2017, oh, we're going to go with Current. And who was the minister at that time? Well, it was the same minister who was renamed to the same position. So it's a kind of a continuity. So it seems that we don't learn from the errors of the past. And this is why we ask for a public and independent inquiry to make sure that the errors of the past that keeps repeating themselves over decades, over numerous IT projects stop happening, because who pays for this? It's the taxpayer in the end. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Do we have any more speakers? Okay. Call a vote.
Mr. McKinnon?
Yes.
Mr. Osborne?
Yes.
Mrs. Tesser-Dirksen?
Yes.
Monsieur Dantel?
Oui.
Mr. Couric?
Yes.
Mrs. Kuzi?
In favor.
Monsieur Lemieux?
En faveur.
All in favor?
All right, so the motion has passed.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Now we will suspend briefly to go in camera. you.